Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast, episode number 62. I'm Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course, author interviews. And this week I have 7 new LitRPG reviews just for you folks. Working extra hard on getting these reviews taken care of for you. Writing suffered a little bit, but not too much. The first review we'll be doing this week is going to be The Eternal Transcend, which is book 3 in the world of Gaim. Then after that, it'll be Kingdom Level 3, which is the 3rd book in that series. Also, The Long Road to Karn, The Realm of Arkon, book 5. After that, it'll be Necromancers, Demons, and Kings, World of Samar, book 2. And then after that, it is going to be Office Wars, Bathroom Politics. And then after that, it's going to be Tossing the Salaad, Caverns and Creature short story. And then finally, it'll be The Builder's Sword, the Legendary Builder book 1. So there you go. But of course, we begin our show with LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we're going to begin with a wonderful discount deal, which I'm always a big fan of personally. The author of Caverns and Creatures, Robert Bevan, has put a ton of his books on sale until I believe until the 30th of July on sale for like 99 cents. And a lot of them are also going to be on Kindle Unlimited, so you can pick them up that way as well. But specifically, I think probably the best deal that he has is going to be the first 4 books, the full-on novels of his Creatures and Caverns series called Critical Failures. Together as an omnibus is 99 cents. So you get 4 books for less than the price of one of them normally. So it's a great deal. It's in the US and the UK only, unfortunately. So anybody outside those countries, I'm sorry. Maybe you can convince somebody to buy them for you in the US and then they can just send you them. There might be a way around that, and you can just pay them back in the 99 cents. Additionally, a lot of his short story collections are also going to be on sale as well. So great stories, really funny, bunch of potty humor, poop jokes and stuff. But I think it's super hilarious myself. But group of friends travel to a portal world. They're stuck there trying to get out. Hilarity ensues. We'll be reviewing one of his newer short stories later in the show. Okay, in other news, you also have Office Wars. Author of that, James Patton, is putting the first book in his series up for free. So beating 99 cents, it's up for free up until August the 1st. So from July the 28th to August the 1st, it's going to be free because on the 1st of August, book 2 in that series is going to come out. So it's kind of a promotional thing from the author, but free. Can't be free. Also, just a quick reminder for everybody, sometimes there are audiobook versions of these same novels, and if you already have the Kindle version, sometimes you get a discount on the audiobook version. So be aware of that even if you've read a story, if you want the audiobook version, sometimes not a discount, you can do it that way. It's a sneaky thing, I know, but it's promotional for Amazon. They sell more things that way. Okay, also in LitRPG news, we have, this is kind of a sadder story from Aidan Avery, author of the Spellbinder novel, book 1 in the Shadow Legacy series. The author of that series has recently removed the sequel to that story and all the pre-orders for an entirely new series he was writing and publishing called The Space Masters from Amazon. Now, the author told me in an email, I talked to him previously about the review that he gave his first book. And he told me that basically because of the poor reviews in book 1 for Spellbinders, that he had decided to remove some information from books 2 and from the Space Master series. Recently, he changed his mind about how much he wanted to put in the book. And so he's pulled the pre-order, he's pulled the book just so he can make the stories better. He basically told me that by email that he's done all this stuff because he felt that his works did not reflect what the LitRPG community deserved. And he hopes by doing this, he can kind of relieve the pressure for himself and create better stories. So while it's always sad to see novels get pulled down for creative reasons, this is not the first time that this has happened, that an author has done this in our community. Jaded Hunter did the exact same thing for very similar reasons in wanting to create the best story possible. It did mess with sales, but it's an author's right and a choice that I'm always going to at least understand, because as somebody who's creative as well, I also want to put the best things possible, so I understand that mindset at least. But it's always sad to see a series get pulled down for whatever reason, because that means that people can't enjoy it if they choose to. So there you go. Okay, also in LitRPG news, Arkon has said on Facebook that the latest book in his Chaos Seed series is just taking longer than he thought it was going to be. Apparently, it's the biggest novel he's written in the series so far, and it's just not going to be ready by the end of July like he thought it was. He'd previously thought it'd be mid-July, didn't hit that deadline. End of July, not going to happen either. The author does apologize for the delay, but he wants to make it as good as possible as well. And so he's just not going to put it out until he feels like it's ready. So you also have to remember, folks, that Arkon is actually Dr. Arkon. He's, I think, a doctor of internal medicine. So he's a real live doctor with a full-time job with like 4 or 5 or 6 10-hour days sometimes. So he also has limited amount of time to write. So we have to be a little lenient in that respect, I think. But I'm looking forward to seeing the novel whenever it comes out. Okay, last but not least, Jeffrey Falcon Loeb has released the cover art for his second book in the Hero of Not series that he's written. He says he actually hasn't written the novel yet. He might be working on work in progress. The first book came out not too long ago. We reviewed it. But the cover art for this one looks creepy. I mean, in a good way, because the author is, the story is not, it's a darker story. So it's very is reflective of the tone of the particular series. So, but I see like creepy rabbits, creepy guy in the background, creepy wolf, and a creepy lady. So lots of interesting things here. So I hope it's good. I look forward to reading it when it comes out, but it is very mood inducing cover, and it's suitably evil adjacent. Okay. Now these are some stories that came out this week that I couldn't review. We're reviewing them the next week, including the Slime Tamers Chronicles, Volume 1, and then Wild Times in Virtual Reality, a Total Immersion VR Adventures Unlimited LitRPG, long title. Also, after that will be Human, a LitRPG novel, Tower of Gates LitRPG Series Book 2, and additionally, Unexplored Into the Wildwood, a LitRPG virtual fantasy adventure. So there you go. So those 4 novels I'll be reviewing next week as well. Okay, some new stuff that came out for LitRPG audiobooks. Lion's Quest Do Will, so by Michael Scott Earl, friend of the show. Hey, book 1 audiobook must have done well because he's putting out for book 2, so yay, I like it. Also, Wade the Clan Ruled of Valdira, book 1, is also out as an audiobook. Now, the publishers chose a very interesting shift in cover art for this particular audiobook. It kind of reminds me of a romance novel, which is a weird marketing strategy to me, but the audiobook is out for people to listen to. Also, The Land, book 3, Alliances in the Chaos Seed series, is out as an audiobook. It came out on the Friday that that the last podcast came out, so I didn't know about it. So I'm letting you know about it now. But it's been out for a week. It's already on the bestseller list for Audible, so it's obviously doing well. You guys, so anybody who hasn't heard about that, it's out. It is out. And of course, one more, Gamer for Life, Alpha World Book 1 by Daniel Shinhofen is also out as an audiobook. So there you go. Okay, upcoming LitRPG. This is where I just read off all the stuff that I know is coming out. I've had a number of stories drop out recently from this list. Like they just disappeared from Amazon. Some of them I already mentioned to you. A few others just poof. I don't know why. And I had a few others like move their release dates. So I'm just going to read them off to you. You can skip ahead if you want to. But if you want to know what's coming up for July and August, here it is. On the 31st of July, it'll be A Slave in the Lost Lands, The Weirdest New Book 2. On August the 1st, it'll be Office Wars, Bathroom Politics, which I'm reviewing today, though. Then also on August 1st, it'll be Into the Black, Book 3 of Alpha Centauri series. On the 4th of August, it'll be The Glitch Fiends, Part 2, Hell's Glitch Book 3. Always a confusing title. Then on August the 8th, Side Quest. This one's new. Then on August the 11th, it'll be Stratus Online Awakening. That one shifted from late July to August 11th, so that's why it's still hanging around. Then on August the 15th, it'll be Favorable Book 4. Also on the 15th of August, it'll be The Last War of Unegaya. And then also on August the 20th, Shaman's Revenge. That one shifted from the 30th to 20th because the author said that's when it's going to come out. So I'm only going to go by what he says. Also on August the 22nd, it's going to be Shards of Reality, a LitRPG adventure. Enter the Realm Book 1. And then finally, all the way into the end of September 28th, On the Last Continent, Alter Game Book 2. So there you go. That's the stuff coming out for the rest of July, all of August, and even a little bit of September. That's all I have. Okay, on to new releases and reviews. Okay, first book in new releases and reviews, folks, is going to be The Eternal Transcend, Worlds of Gaim, book 3, written by Dahaya Anbajagini. I'm probably saying it wrong, but you can see the picture. Okay, this is 250 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I'm just going to read you my description of the summary of the story. The story starts off 2 months after the end of the last book. Zoran has unlocked the second spirit lock and has resurrected an ancient dragon and made him part of his team. While investigating an unspiritual entity, Zoran Diablo and his team find a lady in white and what they think is an eternal. And then suddenly they're all thrown into the past. Not just any past either. It's the time of the great eternal dragon war. Can Zoran find out who pulled them into the past and get back home? So that's my, synopsis of the story. And the answers to that, spoilers, yes and no. So if you don't want to know anything about the story, skip ahead about 5 seconds. But basically, yes, they found out who pulled them in the past, but they spent about 87% of the novel finding him, and they're basically sent there by a number of people to do it, but no, they don't go home. So the story doesn't have a solid conclusion. Just letting you know in advance. There you go. Okay. I knew this story was going to have some issues as soon as I learned time travel. I'm like, in a time travel story, especially when it's not part of the original core series, part of the series storyline, it's usually a red flag that things might be going wrong in the series, or that the author might be trying to change things and shake them up. It's very much like jumping the shark on a television series, in my opinion. If it's done right, great, it's amazing, but a lot of times it's really difficult to do. So as soon as I saw time travel in this particular series, I'm like, oh, okay, let's go with this. Let's see what happens. And generally, time travel stories like this fall into two different categories. One, they go back in the past and they change things inadvertently or overtly, and it changes all the stuff that came before it. Okay. Or they follow the temporal primary directive from Star Trek, and they intentionally try to have as little impact on the past as possible, understanding that it will change the future if they do so. And so that second choice is usually the more boring choice. It's also the safer choice because it doesn't ruin the stuff you've written previously. And in this case, this story takes the second choice, in that they're not going to interact, at least in this book, a lot with the past. The main character runs into himself, which is a more powerful version, because remember, in this series, he's resurrected in book 1. He doesn't know who he is, but it's later revealed he's this super ultra powerful guy who gradually gains his old powers back by doing these spirit unlock things. It's complicated. But in the past version of this, he's totally overpowered. He's the most powerful character or eternal in the entire world. So there. But besides that, they don't really interact too much with other characters in the past, and even then they do some memory wipe stuff, so that it's not an issue with the time stream, which to me is a little boring. I get that you don't want to mess with your story earlier, but if you're going to do time travel stuff, there are just so many options and opportunities. This was very much a safe path, which to me made it slightly less entertaining than I think it could have been. There's plenty of action. The main characters fight a bunch of high-level monsters that are extinct, apparently, in the regular timeline, the regular time they're from. And most of the story really is geared towards figuring out who pulled them into the past. And again, that happens very late in the story. And even then, they're essentially sent there by the main character's old self, the old Diablo, and by a bunch of other characters, which I won't go into their plot lines. But the main character and his group are literally transported to the foot of the guy who time traveled them, his castle at the very end. So it very much does feel like a lot of magic wand waving, and the main characters don't do much on their own to progress the plot. It's other characters doing it for them, being big giant red signs or teleport pads, sending them where they need to go. So I didn't enjoy this particular story as much as I might have some of the others in the series. Book 2 in this series was a relatively decent one. I liked it. There's still some of the issues with a bunch of plot coupons or magic wand waving, but not as much as previous series. And a lot of that is kind of returned in this particular story, in that the plot is advanced by the way, or, just the right character happens to point them in the right direction or to magically teleport them. And so for me, the story did not satisfy as much. So for me, it gets a score of 6 out of 10. not bad, but like not good either. So there you go. Okay, on to our next book, Kingdom Level 3. It is the third book in the Kingdom series, written by Adam Drake. Okay, it is 272 pages long, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I'll read you the author's synopsis. When every citizen in Anika suddenly vanishes without a trace, Rob finds himself completely alone in his little kingdom. He must locate his people and quick or risk losing everyone. Armed with only low-level skills and crummy gear, he must travel into the western mountains, where troglodytes skulk in dark tunnels and dragons rule the sky. But there's one vital weapon he needs to help him in his quest, and it will take a tremendous act of courage to acquire: magic. So there you go. Okay, I wanted to like this story a lot more than I did. Like the first 8% of the story actually is really, really good. And that's mostly because it changes perspective. The first 8% of the story is told from the perspective of the Peck slavers who essentially kidnap everybody in the main character's kingdom. And for those of you not familiar with the story, the main character was a janitor who was teleported to this game world and made the king of this like small little tiny section of land, with a bunch of game walls around it that he had to unlock by becoming more powerful. And so even though in book 2 he expanded the boundaries, he also allowed other people from other lands to also enter his kingdom. And so in book 3, a bunch of Peck slavers have come in and kidnapped his citizens to sell them to a slave market. And so they kidnapped everybody, and the main character basically realizes it at some point. But the first 8% of the novel is told from those slavers' perspective. And so for me, it was a really nice shift in getting someone other than the main character's jaded perspective, and seeing an actual citizen of this world and their culture and their background and their different perspective on the trade that they do. Because from the slaver's perspective, what they're doing isn't wrong. It's not bad. So it was nice to see a different perspective and a different worldview than just the main characters. And I thought, okay, the story is finally opening up. It's going to give you some world building. We're going to learn about other lands, other cultures. And that doesn't happen, unfortunately. After that 8%, it's just back to the main character's perspective, Rob, the janitor king. And it stays with him the rest of the story. And it becomes more about Rob and his singular journey in tracking down the people of his kingdom, but more so in him growing in power. And for a series called Kingdom, I'm always hoping for more kingdom building, and it just hasn't happened in this series. And so I'm a little disappointed in this particular novel, and I'll give the novel like another one more book, but I'm like, it's not really fulfilling the expectations that the title kind of progresses, because to me, the story is supposed to be about kingdom building. It's in the title, which is what it's kind of teased in book 1 a little bit, but it's never really fleshed out and fulfilled. And in this particular story, it's definitely the case in that the main character, Rob, is literally just, he abandons the quest. I'm not going to say abandon, but he goes on a side quest from tracking down the citizens to getting magic and to doing other side quest things. And it kind of goes against the kind of premise of this particular novel, in that he has to hurry up and save his citizens before they're sold into slavery. And yet he takes a bunch of time to go on a bunch of side quests. And eventually they tie up at the end, and that those things end up saving everybody in a very Magic Wand kind of way, that the main character doesn't really do anything himself, which is another problem I have with the story. But for me, like I kept hoping to see kingdom building in this series, and it's just not happening at this point. And I'm like, okay, it's okay. So for me, it just gets another 6 out of 10. So there you go. Okay, on to our next story, The Long Road to Karn, Realm of Arkon, Book 5, written by G. Aquila. Okay, this is 316 pages. It is $5.99. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited. The author's description: when driven by a goal, the impossible oft becomes doable. Like slaughtering an entire coven of the twice-cursed gods' adepts without mercy, or leading a legion of demons to storm the last bastion of the cursed princedom. But as the impossible hurdles keep coming on, even that drive may not be enough for Kreen to escape demon grounds, make it to a higher plane, reunite with his sister and friend, and exact revenge on his mortal enemy. Okay, this is the fifth book in this series. Book 4 was a change of perspective, and a lot of the advertising for this one was like, "Oh, Karn's back. Don't be annoyed." So it is all from the main character of most of the series perspective, Roman, aka Karn. Okay, it's my real quick review of the stories. Remember, it's only been basically a couple months since the main character Roman was trapped in the game by his evil boss, dumped into an unreleased high-level demon expansion, and in those few months, after dying many, many times in the very first book, he's found a way not only to survive, but also to get involved in some really epic quests within the demon lands. He's gone from a nerf noob to a high-level zone leader of legions. He literally has legions of soldiers behind him, and they're on their way to conquer a castle and gain territory of a massive territory. And that's where the novel starts out at. That's like really the first page. It's like, oh, we're going to conquer this kingdom. We're finishing off the last of these enemies, kind of thing. And then they're going to Cridea to actually conquer the capital of this little principality. A princedom, I think they call it technically. I don't know what like the land stratification is or anything. But it's basically, it's its own little kingdom, basically, section of land in a larger kingdom. And so if he can conquer that castle with his legions, then he actually becomes the ruler of that area. And so he can do a bunch of town building stuff. He can start raising taxes, doing skill building, a bunch of stuff like that. But that's not going to happen in the story because it's more about the conquering, at least for the first half of the book. Now, I'm not going to get too spoilery about what happens because some of it's really cool. Some of it's also, there's a lot of storylines in it that are happening all at once, including like a lot of stuff being tied off from like way back in book 1. Like there's a lot of storylines that are finally finished off in this novel before, you get to, in the next book, hopefully, him shifting planes potentially. So Korean Samar in this particular novel, also a unique quest though, that takes him to all the high offices in the demon lands. There's a little bit of political intrigue in the story too, so if that's not your thing, it might be a little bit of turnoff, but there's a ton of action, lots of good fighting, lots of good loot getting, upgrading skills. Again, like a lot of other of the novels in this particular series, the levels kind of jump a little bit. Like every single level is noted, but after like a huge battle, the main character can sometimes jump 5 or 6 levels, and it's like, okay, just be aware that happens. And overall, just had a really good time reading the story. I give this novel a score of 7 out of 10. I really can't say too much about the storyline. There's basically 2 main plot lines. One, the Cridea Castle thing. That's about the first half of the novel. Then the rest of it is exploring possibilities of a new storyline that the main character picks up that I'm not going to spoil for you, but it does take the rest of the story. And then towards the end, it's like, oh, clearing off a few other like old storylines. So overall, really good story. Had a good time reading it. But a lot of this you're not going to understand if you haven't read like books 1 through 4. So there, it is what it is. For me, score 7/10 though. There you go. Okay, on to our next story. Necromancers, Demons, and Kings, World of Samar, Book 2, written by Jared Mandani. Also called LitRPG Freaks. So there you go. It is 294 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I will read you the author's description. Now safe from the grip of Lone Shark and his old demons, Harrison wishes to move on with his new life. His life would venture inside the world of Samar. As Bishop, the half-breed hunter, together with his guild, he intends on keeping the lead and becoming the first group to defeat Valenistrius' lieutenants, Valen, the evil demon goddess. However, Bishop should have learned that nothing ever goes as planned in Samar. He will meet with this strange cult with immense powers. Bishop will uncover a secret that threatens the entire realm, because if he's now free of danger in the outside world, the challenges in-game are only beginning to arise. Soon, Bishop and his friends will taste defeat for the first time. Lurking in the shadows, Valenistrius will seek to win Bishop to her cause, but when the hunter refused, she will go on to show him that his decision could have devastating consequences, and not just in this virtual world. When the game starts to leave marks in real life, where should the line be drawn? With evil creatures in his path threatening to steal away everything he cares about, will Bishop have no other choice but to let his demon half take over? So there you go. That's the author's description. Okay. Let's see, I think I read that already. 294 pages, 399 available, kind of limited. Just in double check. Basically, in the first book, Harrison was recruited as a beta tester for one of the most advanced, fully immersion MMOs ever. He plays a half-demon ranger. He's already formed a guild, defeated some demon lords, and now he's doing the same thing in the rest of this novel. That's the in-game story. The big question is, will he fall to the dark side, or will he stay? And there's a bunch of questions like that. But there's also some really interesting artificial intelligence, virtuality questions that I thought were kind of cool. There are a couple of plot lines going on in the story at this point. Most are very action-oriented. There's the in-game ongoing quest to defeat the demon lords and prevent the demon queen from taking over the game world. That's like the in-game MMO stuff. In the story, the demon lord who must be defeated, like the big boss, is a demoness called Valenstrius or Valen. And the mini boss that the main character is trying to defeat in this particular storyline is a demoness who uses succubi and sirens to tempt men to their doom. So that's one of the demon lords that must be defeated in this particular section of the story. I think last story it was a couple other demon lords. The secondary plotline stems from a quest to clear an undead castle, and it has some semi-political storylines about the king possibly not being who he says there, so a little bit of political intrigue in this one as well. But for me, this second storyline is actually the more interesting of them. The first one is very much an excuse to kill demons or bad guys or NPCs or player characters, and so there's a lot of action-oriented stuff there, clearing out dungeons, going through quest lines, there's murdering bad things left and right. So that's where you get most of your action. The second plotline involving the who actually has the right to rule the kingdom, some flashback stuff about what actually happened with the last king. That to me is a little more interesting because it is not as straightforward. It's not just kill. It's like the main character and his team have to think about how to use this information, because in this game world, the things that they do have an effect on the community. It's not all scripted. And so the main character is actually getting information that he's probably not supposed to get yet, but because of his unique character class or his luck or whatever, or the connections he made to other non-player characters, he's getting a bunch of information that he can then use to change the storyline within this virtual reality world. So I thought that was kind of cool. There are also a lot of other smaller thread storylines in the story, including like the main character finally getting some romance, which I thought was kind of neat as well. But there are some issues with the story that had it in it. The third plot line in the story, which is where I had a lot of issues, the evil AI entity called Valenstrius, who's the demon queen, she apparently, for some reason, is able to influence and harm the main character outside the game. This was lightly touched in book 1. It is more heavily emphasized in book 2 in that he's literally getting in the game. The character is harming him, like she'll grab his throat and try to choke him out, or she'll burn him with fire in game. And then as he logs out in this big virtual training facility that the game developers have for everybody, he'll show handprints on his throat, or he'll actually have a second-degree burn on his chest. That'll eventually go away later. And in addition, he's having nightmares about this crazy demon lady and whispers in his ear from her outside of the game. And so that is, while it's a very cool idea, for me, the logic is not founded in the story yet. There is no talk about the artificial intelligences becoming self-aware or trying to escape the game yet. It's kind of hinted at that might be the way it's going to go, or that it's maybe they tapped into like some alternate universe, but it hasn't actually been stated yet. So for one, that kind of behavior doesn't make sense physically, like digital incidents becoming physical realities. It's not like, in Sword Art Online, the characters died in the game and then died in real life because they essentially had a bomb strapped to their head in their virtual reality headsets. And so there was a correlation between them dying in the game and then triggering a bomb or something, or whatever it was. In this particular world, that sort of connection does not quite exist, or is not explained yet. It's sort of explained away as like, oh, it's your mind creating the physical effects in your body. And that's kind of a way that the author uses to potentially explain it away. But it doesn't really make sense to me. So it bothers my gamer science brain, I think, a lot. Additionally, the fact that the main character, even though he knows he's being harmed by this either AI or demon queen, and then he continues to play, like the logic behind it also doesn't make sense. He basically says, I'm doing this so that the Demon Queen doesn't target the rest of my group or my guild or my team, even though that hasn't happened yet. And so he says, I'm still going to go in so I can be the target. And so they're not going to be targeted by her. And that seems like that doesn't make sense to me, because the game developers know about it and they don't stop the main character. And the main character knows that he can actually physically be harmed by this creature, and he continues to play for what benefit? Because it's not like he wants to make money anymore. Like, that was part of the motivation book one for him playing in the first place, was to get back on his feet, make some money from playing the beta test, and also to prove that he's not a loser, basically. And he did that in book one. And so in book two, he's already made the money, so he's not trying to make money anymore. And he, outside of just, I like these people, it doesn't really make sense that he would stay in the game and suffer physical harm from this AI character. I know I'm rambling a little bit, but it just bugged me, and it took a little way from the story for me. So overall, it's a good story. It is. There's lots of action, demon and undead slaying. There are some really cool looks into like advanced powers that the characters can have, and they're kind of neat. And again, the romance thing was kind of a neat little additional thing in the story that I thought was kind of cute. It's just that some of the plots in the story didn't take places that I thought they were going to, and that's good and bad. But those other things I talked about kind of took away a little bit. But still, I had a really good time. It's just those few things were like, but it's still a good story. It gets a score of 7 out of 10 for me. So there you go. Okay, on to Office Wars, Episode 2, Bathroom Politics. It's written by James Patton. Okay, this one is 135 pages, according to Amazon currently. I remember it's in pre-order right now. The author says it should show something in the 200s because it is actually bigger than the first novel. It is 53,000 words, though, so that should give you kind of an estimate of how long it's actually going to be. It is $2.99 to purchase. It'll be available on Kindle Unlimited when it comes out on August the 1st. I will read you, I'm going to just do the full disclosure thing first. Full disclosure, the author sent me an early review copy. I've already purchased it for a pre-order. Also, this review is coming out several days before the novel actually hits Amazon shelves. The author asked me to do it through page because he wanted to experimentally test what getting a review out before the novel actually hits would do for sales, basically. So, like he got the novel to me in time to do it by my deadline I gave him, so I'll review it, and we'll all kind of see how this experiment goes for him. Because this type of thing I can kind of see going really good or really bad. Like a good review might bump pre-order shelves, a really bad review might, knock them down a little bit. And so it's definitely a choice from the author. He asked me to do it. I'm like, we'll try the experiment, man. And so that's why this is coming out a little bit early. Okay. I will read you the author's description of the story. It is Office Wars is in full swing, and Bran finds his everyday life in disarray. Vicky poses a problem, but he lacks the time and resources to figure out. He can no longer bail on Office Wars, or it could very well mean his freedom. His employer manipulates him to a deal, but Bran cannot be sure what is really at stake. There is even a salary on the line, and if Bran fails to hold up his end of a deal, he'll become a serf for the next 5 years. And in the middle of everything, he is starting to believe the people on his team are becoming real friends. Oh no. As he gets to know some of them, he realizes Office Wars could change their lives, and his decision in Office Wars were inadvertently putting them all at risk. A tough decision is before him, and he might have the one poker chip that can bind them all. Between his employer's manipulation, Vicky, Office Wars, and the potential permanent loss of his friends, that he's finding out that he cannot all be done. He cannot do it all alone, I should say. Can he navigate this challenging world and still hold on to the things he cares most about, or are all the secrets going to tear his world apart? Bum, bum, bum. Okay. Let's see. The first 6% of the story, you should be aware, almost feels like a different story. It's a prologue about an AI named Vonix that creates a bunch of metal zombies from living humans after it seizes control of them in a bid for freedom for the real world. It's a nice little story that the author. I talked to the author by like Facebook Messenger a few times. He kind of explained it to me this way. He intends for like these little prologues or interludes in the story to almost be little short stories that will connect to a larger plotline later on in the series. So he's definitely planning ahead with all this stuff. So even if you read it and you don't see how it directly connects yet, the author plans to connect it all later. So don't be thrown off that it reads like your first section reads like a different novel. It's connected to this world. But by 7% of the novel, you're right back in the main storyline with Bran, who's doing the office war thing, which is kind of the core of what I loved about the story. Like, I'm okay with the extra stuff if it makes sense eventually. But the thing I come to read for the story is the office war stuff, the actual office war thing. But so the offer gets you there by 7% of the novel. The main character gets a couple of new powers, which are kind of cool. You reconnect with Finn and a couple of his artificial intelligences. So it's a nice catch up with him as well. There is kind of a brief scene I should probably warn you about, in that it is a little sexual. It's also a little rapey, and it's of the main character. Like, within the first beginning part of the office war section of the story, 7%. He talks to his AI for a little bit, gets a new power, and then he jumps into the game, and he immediately has to go talk to his actual in-game bosses, the ones that forced him into the office war game. And he makes a deal with them in that if he gets to the halfway point, if he can't get to the halfway point of office wars, he has to become a serf for 5 years, which is what's inferred in the author description, so it's not spoilery. But if he gets to the 25% mark of office wars, which is super challenging, he'll actually get a lifelong salary. And in a world where, it's everybody's essentially immortal as long as they stay in their game capsule, that's a very big thing. And so those are the stakes that the main character is playing for now. Now, after that, one of his bosses, a female, actually binds him against his will. She uses some word game power and proceeds to physically assault him in a semi-sexual way. Now, this could go as, depending on how you view it, it could be viewed as bondage or kind of rapey, because the main character doesn't consent to being bound. He certainly didn't consent to being physically hurt, even if it is a sexual arousal format. And the only reason he consents to actually have sex with her is because he wants the pain to stop. And so it's kind of rapey to me. And like, okay, that's kind of a weird insertion, but it could be something along like the author's commenting on the weird way societies view male rape in a lot of cases. It could also be that the author's really trying to emphasize exactly how evil his corporate bosses are, which may be the big thing. But for me, it was kind of weird to be in there. And then later on, like in the next scene, the main character's AI is like, oh, I kind of did you a favor. I got you laid. Even if it wasn't in a way that the main character actually wanted. So I'm like, maybe there may be some subtext there that I'm just not quite getting, or maybe I'm getting them out. I know it's connecting to like the larger storyline yet, but just so you're aware that is there. It's a very small part of the story though. Okay. There's a lot of really cool things in the story after that though. Once the main character meets back up with his team, he chooses a new specialization and they're off to clear the levels of the game. And there's a lot of cool stuff there. Lots of Office Space jokes. The group becomes a more cohesive unit as he gets to know them and see their backstories and why they're playing the Office Wars. Some of them want to be free of their serfdom. Some of them just want to advance. But for each one of them, like the synopsis says, it means a life-altering potentiality for them. So there you go. There's a bunch of fights, mazes, puzzles that they solve. So very much what happened in book 1 expanded. So great stuff there. There's also, of course, a lot of hilarious situational humor. Again, a ton of Office Space jokes. If you've seen that movie and you enjoy it, you're going to get a lot of them, and you're going to get like an extra layer of hilarity in this particular novel. So there you go. Overall, really good story. There are a few IRL, in real life, threats to the main character that will also be threaded into the story, which I thought was kind of a neat turn. It hits all the right funny bones for me. Mixes action and tension with the virtual reality death game, and the speculative conversations about virtual reality and artificial intelligence are really nice little cherries on top that I thought were kind of cool. So there you go. Also, don't forget the book 1 is going to be free from July 28th to August the 1st, so you can pick that up before this one comes out to catch up for free. So you can't go wrong with that. The score the novel gets for me a score of 7 out of 10. So there you go. I enjoyed it. Okay, on to Tossing the Salaad, Caverns the Creature short story from Robert Bevan. It is 99 cents. It is 30 pages. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited, but for 99 cents, it's pretty reasonable. I think it's the lowest price you can go for an Amazon Kindle book. So there you go. I will read you my description of the story, it's not going to get too spoiler, I hope. Our favorite team is trapped in a tabletop game. They plan to steal some herbs from a healer that is growing them and resell them for a profit. Cooper, of course, eats some, even though he's already been told that they're very toxic. And so there's some explosive back end results. Trying to get Cooper to a cleric, Julian summons a horse that causes the ground beneath them to collapse into a cave, taking Cooper and the whole team with them. And it turns out it's at the home of a giant frog creature, and he's not taking visitors. So there you go. And of course, hilarity, action, some really interesting butt stuff happens. I'm not going to spoil it, but it's funny. And if you're familiar with the Caverns and Creature series, then there's a certain level of poop humor that you're going to expect in the series and this particular novel, and it absolutely delivers. It's a short story though, 30 pages, so just be aware. I enjoyed it. 7 out of 10. Okay, last but not least, The Builder Sword, the Legendary Builder, Book 1, written by J.A. Cipriano, who's a prolific. He writes a lot of stuff. I mean, looking at his catalog, I'm like, there's almost a couple dozen books. So I gotta admire his writing speed, if nothing else. It is 338 pages. It is $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I will read you the author's description. Arthur never expected to wind up in hell. At least not because he found an ancient sword in a pawn shop. To make matters worse, hell isn't as he thought. It's a desolate, wasteland under siege by an all-consuming void known as the darkness. Now he's trapped with no way home, a ragtag army of women, and a sword whose only power is to modify the abilities of those around him. Not exactly winning odds. Worse, if the darkness isn't stopped, not only will it devour hell, but Earth will be next on the menu. Okay, from the description on Amazon, I really didn't think this was going to be a LitRPG story, but it absolutely is. So I'm glad that I looked it over, that somebody suggested that I go back and look at it, because it is LitRPG, and I would have felt bad missing it and not reading it all. The hook in this story is really nice. Like the first 10% of the novel is quite interesting, and it makes you want to read more. So the author does a really good job of getting you interested in the main character and the storyline very quickly. After the main character, Arthur Curry, spends his life savings on a beatable sword, he has the power to see people's character sheets. Whether it's his or all the stuff that he owns in his house. And he accidentally summons a succubus, which doesn't quite make sense with the sword thing, but it is what it is. And so he summons a succubus, and he sees, because he summoned her, I guess the sword thinks it's his property, because he can only see the stats and characters of things that he owns, his property. And so because he summoned her, apparently she's his property. We'll talk about that thing later. But she tells him that, you must be the legendary builder, and your destiny is to save all the women of hell using your new powers. And she kidnaps him to hell. And so that's where the story gets very quickly. But like I said, the hook of the story is really well done. Like, you feel for the character very quickly. You feel his desire for the sword and his place in the world, how he doesn't feel important. And so for getting a magic power like this seems kind of cool, and it makes you interested and engaged in the story. So good job there for the author in making me interested in the story. My interest kind of petered off a little bit from that point, but that's a separate issue. So, but good hook. A lot of the early part of the story kind of seems to exist solely to explain or show off the main character's part, like literally the first half of the story. There's in hell, apparently all the men were killed off, and so it's all women, because the darkness knows about a prophecy about the builder coming and him being male, and so all the men in hell were killed off. Again, kind of an inconsistency or plot hole, but I'm like, okay, we'll skip that for now. And so the main character comes to this town led by this succubus named Gwen, and he's told that he has to help them, and he sees all their ability scores and their character sheets, and he starts like adding things up and kind of messing with their class skills and giving them new powers and expanding the experience points that they have there. And it in some ways it makes sense in that it's the main character has to be important. And so I get that part of the story. Like, that's his power. That's something he can do. So he's going to use it to save everybody. But from a different perspective, he's coming to essentially a town he doesn't know, and talking to a bunch of very capable, potentially powerful women who aren't really filling their potential until he upgrades them and makes them better, and helps. And until he does that, apparently they're not able to defend against the darkness very well. And so from that perspective, it seems a little weird. But if you can ignore that little bit, then you really might enjoy the story. There are some other issues I had with the story from the cover and some of the early scenes in the story. There's kind of a promise of a harem aspect to the novel, and it's not really fulfilled into the last 20% of the story, but when it does, it's very funny. There's no like graphic sex or anything, but from the cover you can see, okay, this is kind of implied, and it's not fulfilled until the very end. It's not graphic sex, a lot of faded back stuff, but again, it's how it's fulfilled is kind of funny, and I like that about it. But it's just late in the game to kind of fulfill on that promise. So there you go. Another issue I had with the story was kind of the lack of world building. Like at the beginning, that hook, very well done. I felt for the character, empathized with them. But after that percent point, a lot of that fades away in favor of explaining the game mechanics and in favor of seeing the main character look at all the skill sheets, character sheets, and a bunch of game stuff. The author either didn't have time or room, whatever, but there wasn't a lot of like world building. I don't know much about Hell. I'll tell you it this way. At the end of the novel, I know more about the villain of the story than I do about the main character, and I know more about her motivations, and I empathize more with her than I do with the main character and most of the main cast. And that feels a little skewed to me. I mean, it's always good to empathize and understand the main character or the villain's motivations, but I should probably understand at least as much about the main character and understand where he's coming from, what his background is, and what the background of the other characters are as well. So for me, like that lack of world building kind of took away from the story a little bit. Not a lot, but it was enough. The bigger thing for me were like the huge plot holes in the story and some of the inconsistencies within the game rules or the characters themselves. This is going to get a tiny bit spoiler, so you want to skip ahead a couple minutes if you don't want to hear this, some of the plot holes I saw. But for me, just as a few examples, very later in midpoint from the story on, one of the main characters, one of the demons that the main character knows and cares for is kidnapped by the bad lady, I should say. But for some reason, it never occurs to him to try to summon her to him using his magic sword, which would have seemed like a really easy solution and kind of negating the entire reason for the second half of the story. I mean, big plot hole. Maybe I missed something that prevented him from doing the story, but for me, that was like, why doesn't he just use his magic sword summoning power to summon that demon he owns from the evil people? Because he summoned her from hell to earth, which seems very, a larger distance. But whatever. I can kind of overlook some of these things. In addition, some characters within this world in hell seem to know about the experience points, the levels, the skill tree kind of thing, but others don't. And there's no real explanation why there's a difference. Additionally, the very overpowered villainess, who doesn't show up till like halfway in the story, you don't see her until then. She literally has the main character in her hands many times. And every single time he escapes by some magic wand effect, like, some magical event happens that just happens to save him and push her away for some other fight later in the story. And so that happens a lot in the story. And so for me, just all these combinations of things kind of took away from the story for me. But if you can ignore those things, you're probably really going to like it. Like there are, in the Amazon reviews for the story, there are essentially two groups. One, people who can't ignore those plot holes and those inconsistencies. And so they give them less than stellar reviews. And then there's everyone else. Those other people, the other half is like, they can ignore it and they're like, this is good. The action's good. The crafting is good. And both narratives are true. Like if you can ignore these plot holes and inconsistencies, great. You're going to like this story probably more than I do. Because there are things in the story that are really good and they're really nice. For example, the action stuff. Action is well written. There are gradually increasingly difficult combat scenes. The monsters have a great variety of types and different ways that the characters have to figure out how to beat them. Crafting is really important in the story, and that's essentially how these problems are solved. Sometimes a little too conveniently, but crafting is important in the story, which I liked. There's also a very good explanation of the skill trees that these various classes and crafting classes have, or their combat or crafting. There's a nice descriptive section, so I understand all the different possible choices, and the main character chooses whatever it is for whatever reasons. But the explanation of the game mechanics is there, and I like that about the story. Because again, for me, the more I understand about the world, this game mechanic wise, the better I like it. And again, like I said, the hook in the beginning is really nice. But overall, like I said, not a bad story. This really does remind me of an expanded version of the town building fight scene from one of the author's other LitRPG series, kind of combined with the unique skill of upgrading his property from supercells and superheroes. It's like those two ideas were meshed together, combined, and this is what came out. However, even though I do like the crafting, I like the combat in the story, the lack of world building, some really big plot holes, inconsistencies, and the magic. I think some people call them plot coupons or magic wand waving to figure out problems, kind of stopped it from being as enjoyable for me. Again, some other people might really like it despite those things. That's cool. For me, it's a score of 6 out of 10. So there you go. That is it. 7 stories all wrapped up for you folks and reviewed. Remember, you can follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, plenty of places to come and support the show. Remember, this show does not exist without you folks and your support. Like I said, this show is me giving reviews, but it's more about me connecting with you in the audience about this thing that I love, LitRPG. So thank you very much. And if you want to support the podcast in any way, shape, or form, you can find all the ways you do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. But again, thanks for hanging out with me. Had a good time talking to you and goofing off and gushing about LitRPG and the things that I really love. And remember, until I see you again, before I forget, next week and for the next couple weeks after that, I'm actually going to be on the road. It's going to be a vacation-ish for me, but I'll still be doing podcasts and reading a bunch of LitRPG books. You're probably going to see a more casual Ramon because I'm not going to be at home. I'm going to be traveling all the way up to Oregon and so it's going to be interesting to see how I'm going to do the podcast on the road. So you're probably not going to get as good lighting. You're still going to get a mic, because I record this on my phone, so not an issue there. But it is going to be fun, interesting. And if anybody happens to be on the road along the way, more than happy to go hang out with you guys. We can do an impromptu LitRPG meetup or something. Shoot me the details of where you're all along the way. We'll see if I can fit you in for like a beer. Maybe we can have lunch together, whatever. You can always shoot me an email at feedback@geekbuzpodcast.com. But there you go. That's the news about next week and the week after that. So there you go. Thanks again for hanging out with me. Until we can hang out again, remember, folks, to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.